shaking. It's episode 148, Golden Mike Live. You cannot shake double S Stephanie Simpson. I'm trying to scream in her ear right now. She will. Oh, she did. She gave a little peep. She gave us a little peep. But absolutely stoked on this Friday to end this week with the idea of this. We all have had stressful weeks. We all have had stressful lives. But how can we redefine our relationship with stress so that it starts working for you instead of against you? Now, I've always been the type of dude, for the longest time, I always thought that I need to live stress-free. But you know what, y'all? It's kind of an illusion, because if I was stress-free, I wouldn't get anything done. So our guest today, I'm so glad to call her my pal. We shared a stage. She just told me she had a sort of stress herself, which I didn't see in New York. We were in Speakers Who Dare. She is an artist, an educator, a consultant, a coach, and a guest on the Golden Mic to talk about stress today. Welcome, my friend, Stephanie Simpson. Stephanie, how are you, sister?
Oh, I'm great. How are you?
I feel so stressed compared to you.
Oh, no, you shouldn't.
You're so
Well, I'm
chill.
really excited to be. I'm very excited to be here. I wouldn't say I'm always so chill. I just show it in different ways, maybe.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I can't wait to talk about the idea of stress and working with stress, having stress work for you, especially since I've had a very tumultuous relationship with my friend stress, right?
Mhm.
And so I can't wait to hear what you have to say about it today. Everybody, if you're here to tune in to see Stephanie Simpson, you're in the right place. For those of you who have not met me, my name is Mark Cordone, positive psychology coach, founder of the Make Money Coaching Program, founder of the Joy Revolution, and more importantly, on a regular basis, I get to ask my friends like Stephanie 2 questions. It's an easy gig I've got. Being a positive psychology coach. Number 1, how happy are you today? And number 2, how much are you living in your purpose? So Stephanie Simpson, friend, how happy are you today, and how much are you living in your purpose?
Oh, these are really great questions. So I would say I am really happy because it's Friday. I mean, how can you not be happy on a Friday?
Yeah.
And I would say in general, I'm doing really well. You know, I like to find the joy moments that I can figure out in life. It's interesting. I had an interesting relationship with the word happy for a while, because I sometimes feel like happy is something that people think they can attain, right? Like it's this like end goal.
Yep.
And so I had to do a little bit of a mind shift a few years ago into like what brings me joy and how can I live more in my joy, and then realizing that when I'm living in my joy, then I'm actually in a happy place, as opposed to being like, oh, what's going to make me happy? That actually seemed really stressful. Like,
It does seem very
because
stressful.
it's like, what's going to make me happy? Oh, getting that new job is going to make me happy, or making this amount of money is going to make me happy. And then you kind of do those things, and then you're like, wait, but I don't feel happy. I feel the same. And so I had to kind of like shift my mindset on that. So I like to say to myself, like, where can I find the joy in what I'm doing?
This is why I love you. This is why you're awesome. And like already, like 2 minutes into this, you're making a distinction between happiness and joy, right? Because like happiness is so much about like the chase and the attainment of something external from yourself, which means that you're at the mercy of attaining it. Versus joy, which is like Viktor Frankl work, is like nothing can rock you. Like when you're in joy, chaos can come through, and like you can be totally unscathed by it, you know? Or you can let in the good stress, right? And like the eustress versus the distress. So I'm happy to go into that with
Right.
you today.
Well, yeah. So I mean, something I was just thinking about to some of my students that I'm advising something, a project that they're working on right now, and they've come in every time we've had a meeting, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is so stressful." And I was like, "Well, how can we reframe this? I mean, you right now have been given 7 weeks at the end of your senior year to work on creating a musical together, which is what you always wanted to do. So yes, there are maybe some stressful moments that are happening, and there's a lot in you that's riding on this, but like, can we stop and be like, I get to do this? Like,
Yeah.
I get to make something. So like to go into your second question, are you living in your purpose? I think that's a question I actually ask myself daily. Is like, am I doing what feels good? Am I doing what feels right to me? And I would say that right now I feel like I'm on a good track. You know, that's not to say that in another year something may shift and I'm like, you know what, I need to like follow this right now. But I've been really fortunate to be able to create jobs for myself, whether it's in the school that I currently work with or the coaching business that I started a few years ago, to be able to really change the programs and the work that I'm doing to reflect what I'm interested in and what feels like the right way to share my message and serve the people around me.
I I absolutely love that as well. You're gonna totally have this job in probably 3 hours. You're gonna be the new host of the Golden Mike Live. The way you're answering these questions. So y'all, it's been a fun ride for me for 149 episodes. But like Stephanie's got it from here. But what I do love about the idea of the way that you talk about purpose is that so many people come and talk about purpose from the standpoint of, well, I was born to do this one thing and this one purpose. And what I love is that you have a feedback loop built into your purpose where you're like, if it's not working right now, that's old Stephanie. Stephanie's always growing. Simpson's always changing, which means that what I'm doing could impact more people. The stage that I'm on will look different next year. The people that I'm working with will look different. I love the fact that you're always reassessing, like, is this bringing me maximum joy and fulfillment and meaning right now? And when you put those two together, it's amazing. So for those of you watching live, watching the replay, I want you to do this. Stephanie's got a very cool definition of happiness, joy, bringing meaning together. Hit that heart. Let us know you're alive. So many people are just walking through life doing the status quo right now. Let us know you're above the status quo. Hit those hearts. Let us know that your heart is beating. Now, here's the other thing. A lot of people think that positive psychology, joy, is all about being... I see it. I see you guys hitting the heart. That's amazing. You guys, or folks might think that positive psychology and joy research is about being 24/7 happy. Shits and giggles 24/7. Taco Tuesday every day. Stephanie Simpson riding on Pegasus across the sky with the bag full of Skittles. When I met her, that's what it felt like. She was dropping Skittles on the audience, right? Now, I see Simpson's head going like this. Simpson, what's your take on that?
It's so funny that you would say that, because when I started coaching people, I started with, so my journey of being a dancer, musical theater performer, I started working after finishing my first graduate program with performers, specifically on mental training, to get dancers and actors and singers to be able to get their mind to work for them and not against them, because I felt like that was something that I struggled with a lot. And so I did a deep dive in my MFA program into fear and what can we look to sports psychology and positive psychology and self-psychology to help this. And I found that when I started working with clients, we would, I'd be coaching them on dance stuff, but then I'd also be developing these mental training programs for them. And I would start talking about, positive replacement. How can we observe our thoughts and notice when we're having a limiting belief? And I actually stopped using the words negative and positive. And I was like, notice when you're having a limiting belief or a belief that maybe is not serving you, and take a moment to stop. Observe it. Don't analyze it, because then we get really judgy. But observe it and decide, is that something is facilitating you or debilitating you? And then try to replace it with something that's going to serve you and help you move forward. And I would have clients turn around and be like, well, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. And I was like, I agree. It's not, because honestly, if everything's always rainbows and butterflies, how do you know it's always rainbows and butterflies? You've got to have the peaks and the valleys, right? You have to have the peaks and valleys. Those need to happen. That's how you build your resilience. That's how you build your integrity and your character. You need to have challenges, but it's how you respond to those challenges. That are the biggest thing.
It's been a wild ride. Stephanie Simpson has taken my job officially. She's taken the mic out of my hands, and now she's speaking the truth. I love it. I do love that. I do love that idea of taking a limiting belief and replacing it with the idea of an empowering one. Now, a lot of people might be like, "Oh, that's really nice to put in a happy platitude in there," but that's where the work starts, right? Because if you start with a limiting belief, you're already taking me off the format of my show. It's all gone off haywire here. We're gonna talk shop now. If you start with a limiting belief limits emotions. Limiting emotions limit your actions, and suddenly that's why you'll feel stuck, and your whole mind will find reasoning for you to stay stuck.
Right.
And so when you put, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and here's the kicker, is that most limiting beliefs aren't actually authentic to our own story. It's a belief that we have listened from somebody else based on their story. And so it actually has nothing to do with us. Like I have, and I mean, I have examples of this in a lot of different ways. So I ran the New York City Marathon a couple of years ago, and I was not a runner. Like I literally was not a runner. I played sports when I was much younger, but then I chose dance and didn't run. And
Dance
I
is a
didn't
sport
run.
in my book.
Oh, it totally is. But I didn't run a lot because dance teachers would say dancers can't run. It's bad for your knees. You can't do it, and dancers shouldn't be able to do it. So that was a belief that I had. That was my story, was like, I can't run. I'm a dancer. That's not good for me. We can't do it. I also had in my mind what a marathon runner should look like. You know, they should be this like really skinny, very muscular, like, you know, power runner. And when I moved to New York City 6 years ago, like 2 years in, I decided I'm going to go watch the New York City Marathon. And I was blown away by all the people that were running it. I mean, so many ages, shapes, sizes, backgrounds, like everything. And I was like, I'm so inspired right now. Like, you all are doing this and you're so determined. You have such perseverance. Like, I want to be one of those people. And I wasn't the next year. And I went and watched again. And I was like, why am I not one of these people? And I kid you not, the next day I started running, and I just did it. I just started running. And even like friends and family were like, how are you going to do that? You can't, run a marathon in a year. And I was like, no, I'm going to do this. But it got challenging at one point because my mind kept saying, you're not a runner. You can't do this. You don't deserve to be there. Like, you're kind of just posing as a runner. And I had to stop myself and actually start coaching myself. Yeah. And like when I'd be running with like a run group on a Saturday morning, and someone would be like, oh, how long have you been running? And I'd be like, oh, I'm not a runner. And I would literally in mid-sentence stop and be like, I'm becoming a runner, because that's all I could say at that point. And then finally, after a couple of months and a bunch of races, I was like, oh no, I'm a runner. But I literally had to write out like affirmations being like, I deserve to be here. Yep. I am capable of doing this. I am a strong runner. Like all of those sort of things, and say it over and over and over again until I started to believe the story I wanted for myself.
And one of the things too is once you start the idea of belief and gaining that momentum, right? Is also it's also about the shift in the perspective. Once you take on a more empowering set of belief systems, suddenly the kind of what are they called, those eye guards they put on horses?
Like the blinders.
The blinders, right? The blinders get taken off. In psychology, it's called the RAS system, right? Because you look in a particular thing, suddenly the RAS system opens up, and you're like, whoa, hold on a second. Like I've been here at the marathon for 2 years, and it looks like a crap ton of people are dancers. And there's evidence to the contrary of that limiting belief. But you have to reinforce that evidence on a regular basis, even if it's you telling yourself that. Unbelievable stuff. So it's not about the shits and giggles 24/7. So if you're watching on this Friday and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear two people talk about happiness right now. I'm not in full purpose. I've been working in my job for like 30 years. I don't know what's going on. Or like, I was super happy last week and I don't know what's going on this week. That's cool. That's part of your journey. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you're living life. I just want to do this for shits and giggles now, Simpson. But one of the coolest things about positive psychology and coaching work is the idea of hope, right? So it doesn't really matter at any point. Your story always will matter. You reflecting on your story always matters. The way you make meaning always matters. But it doesn't matter right now. For you relaxing watching us talk to each other, or you being on the run watching the replay in the store. I know some people listen in the store while you're shopping. it doesn't matter whether you were a 1 or a 10 or earlier this week. If you know that today you can create the best day of your life, not a day where rainbows and all that stuff is showing up, but it's just a really solid, amazing day where you've learned from all your ups and downs. That's called hope theory, and it's got the power as much of you having high emotional intelligence, high intelligence quotient. So all of that stuff plus true hope theory brings us to next levels of self-actualization and performance. If you're feeling hope right now, Simpson, there's a button down there. I know you guys want to see Simpson make the wow face, so hit the wow face while Simpson and I make it. I want to make her blush a little bit. What's your wow face look like, Simpson?
What's my wow? Like surprise wow? Like, oh my God.
That's it. Oh my God, you have the most chill wow face ever. I love it. So let's get back to the Simpson story for a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when you felt like you needed some mental training for yourself, and I'm sure that if you're into the mental training, you always need to boost it. There's no aha moment and you stay aha'd. You have to always sustain it. But what is your story of sort of being this creative and making this life for yourself out there in New York?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started out as a dancer from a very, very young age and got into musical theater. And that just kind of became my like love, was just seeing these stories come to life and like acting and singing and dancing. And it was always, and then I started choreographing and directing. And I actually moved out to LA right after undergrad and lived out there for a few years. And I think about LA a lot now because it really did make me the person that I am. And though it was not an easy time out there, I mean, you become like one of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And, you know, being 21, moving 3,000 miles away from my family and being out there, it was really challenging. And actually that was my first year there was, the first time I started hearing more about this idea of positive thoughts and attracting like, and the law of attraction and everything like that. And I'll tell you, it took me a year before I actually delved into it. And so I always think about the fact that the universe will bring things around to you multiple times if you're not ready. And I have a lot of stories about how that has happened. But I just remember working on a film and one of the producers was like, you should read the book, The Law of Attraction. It's all about your thoughts and your thoughts create your reality. And I literally was like, I cannot read that because I have so many thoughts and I don't want that to be a reality for me. And now think, like, knowing the language I know now, thinking about little Stephanie, 21-year-old Stephanie there, I mean, I literally just wasn't ready to own the fact that I had created my reality because of the thoughts I were having. I also think that, like, when I was growing up, we didn't really talk a lot about thoughts. Like, if you did say that you had thoughts, people were like, okay, like, don't tell a lot of people that you have things going on in your head, you know? Whereas it's nice now that, you know, students and adults are starting to talk about, like, I always talk about it as our cheerleader and our gremlin. Like, what is the gremlin saying? What is the cheerleader saying? So it took me a full year before I actually read, at the book at that time was The Secret that I was reading. And it was kind of like my gateway into this other way of thinking that at times felt overwhelming because it was a lot of work to start shifting myself from this limiting belief to more open, facilitating, hopeful belief, but also really freeing to know that if I really wanted something, I had the ability to own that and empower myself with that. And that just kind of led me on this path that I've just continued to say yes to things. I mean, the other one that came up a lot of times was yoga. I mean, I'm now a yoga teacher and it's part of my coaching practice and my own practice. Yet yoga came into my life many a times and I was like, oh no, not going to do that. Like, not doing this, what is that? And now it's like something I talk to so many people about, but it came into my life 3 times before I finally was ready to say yes to it.
In retrospect, do you know what the resistance was from?
Well, I know that the one with the reading The Secret was that I was just really afraid to have to, like, call a spade and be like, I can't blame someone else for things.
Yeah.
I have to own this. I know that for a fact. The yoga thing, I don't actually know why I wasn't ready for it at the different times, but I'm actually really happy that it came into my world right after I finished my MFA dance performance degree. And I was a little, not lost, but I had planned to move to New York right after that. But as most grad students, I was poor. So I could not do that. And I ended up moving back to Connecticut and living with my parents at the age of like 27, away, like years after being on my own. And there was a lot of, for myself, shame of like having to move back home and, you know, have I like failed as an artist and all that. But yet I ended up being in a place where I got to do amazing jobs and book amazing shows and choreograph and direct and do a lot and start a dance company and all that sort of stuff, which I never would have been able to do if I hadn't lived with my parents. And yoga was like a place that I could find my grounding, because a lot of interesting things happened when I moved back home. A lot of like things, like I love my family, I love my parents and everything like that, but it is challenging living with your parents as an adult. And a lot of the work that I had done to become the person I wanted to become was starting to get triggered in a different way, being back where I was from ages 0 to 17, you know?
Sure.
And so yoga provided that place and that space for me to continue to work on myself in a place that, at a time where I don't know that my parents knew what to do with me, and I didn't know what to do with them and all of that. And, you know, I ended up then moving to New York the year after that, and which I would never have been able to do if I couldn't stay with them and save money as well. So, you know, knowing that everything that you're going through, no matter what in your life, is always setting you up for that next thing so that you can be successful in that next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about fear in a second. We're going to completely segue to that, but I have to ask you, because you moved out to LA. I think I have a very stereotypical viewpoint of what creatives and dancers go through, because like, and I want to ask you to either pop my bubble or reify it, right? Like, I see it as, like, especially if you go out to LA or New York, I see it as being very cutthroat. I see like folks at times feeling very lost, and then I saw Black Swan, which is like totally like the wildest movie ever. Like, how much of your life can you relate to sort of a cutthroat? I don't know. Even sometimes with, you know, we worked with a director in New York who is fantastic, and in many ways is the antithesis of a stereotypical, like my stereotypical viewpoint of what I think a director would be like. I felt like I was going to get screamed at something if I missed a line, and she was amazing in terms of like nurturing. But I see it also as being very different in different spaces. Is it like that?
It can be that way, and it cannot be that way. So I think it depends on, well, the first and foremost for any artist, but I think this for any group of people at all, you always want to just surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
So I was really fortunate that when I moved out to New York, LA, this college I went to had a internship program out there, and so many of us moved out around the same time.
So cohort.
And so, and so I spent some time out there through school and an internship, came back, lived in Connecticut for a little bit, went back again. And not all of us were there, and we didn't all live in the same areas, which LA is kind of spread out, but we all knew that we had each other. But I also was really fortunate to have two really close guy friends that I grew up in Connecticut with, also move out at the same time.
Oh, right on.
And even though we all were in the industry of some sort, we were in it in different ways. And so it was important for me to find good people to surround yourself with. Now, that does not mean that there isn't some sort of like competition and jealousy sometimes around people, and especially at a younger age, though the earliest you can figure out in your career, and this is something I teach my like teenagers and college kids all the time, the more that you can find out that you're actually not in competition with each other, and that when you go into an audition, you need to go in there and just be the best you, and that's what's going to get you the job, and just focus on you bringing the best energy that you can. That's when you're going to like book things. And the more that you think about like, oh, that person looks better than me, or this person sang higher than me, or oh my God, they've done this and this and this, you're using so much energy to be away from you that you're going to go into that room depleted. And the more that you can build each other up, the better it is, because actually as you get older and you all start doing different projects, you start hiring most of your friends after a while. So, being a good person in that way. And the same thing goes for New York. When I moved to New York, I was older, but I, again, still like found my people. We support each other. We go out there and go to each other's comedy shows, go to each other's dance shows, go to each other's plays and musicals and everything like that. And we're there to help each other as opposed to cut each other down. But that is something I feel like you start realizing more as you get older. When it comes to like directors and choreographers, I agree that we had a great director here. And her and I both have very similar thought processes around how to create that space. And actually my thesis in my MFA was all about that, of like, how do you create and facilitate and hold space as a director choreographer where you can create an environment where the performers feel safe? Because actually and I was using models from sports psychology. So I was using like situational leadership, group development, and group cohesion, and putting those practices into play and then analyzing it, while also coaching my dancers one-on-one and creating mental training programs for them so that they could show up on stage without the performance anxiety and all of that and really feel safe to be seen. That is not necessarily what all directors and choreographers do. However, and that's the same with leaders now. But there's definitely a shift in realizing that if you want the best out of the people in front of you, whether that's on stage or in the team room or anything like that, you have to be a leader that's empathetic. You have to be a leader that is visionary, and you have to be a leader that can change your style and not just be this directive, authoritarian way. That's not to say that everybody I've worked with is like that, but it's because of those people that I started questioning, is that the only way? And is that the best way? And so they made me a better director, choreographer, leader, because I realized I don't want that. Like, you didn't get the best performance out of me because I was terrified of you, So that there's that. But I think there's a shift happening, both in the creative world and not creative world.
Well, I want to go there for a second. I was watching VHS tapes. I took 9 years of violin lessons, and I never told my violin teacher that I couldn't read the music. I just played by ear, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, though, that always scared me was when it was time to practice for concerts, if I didn't have a recording, and it wasn't, I grew up in the 80s, right? So, like, I didn't really have access to, like, a phone recorder at the time. Right. So I had to remember what she played and then go home and try to emulate that, right? Yeah. So we went back and watched the tapes, and I could see it, like I was shaking. It wasn't vibrato, it was fear that was causing the wonderful handshakes. And I then remember always taking stuff like that into the workplace, right? I remember the first presentation I had in the workplace. And it wasn't really at the time, you never really were coached on mindset to present in front of people, right? They just expected you, because you were getting paid to perform. Everything is a performance, right? According to sociology. And then, if I didn't have like a director like I had in New York, I'm pretty sure that I'd go through the hijack process in my mind and just stop. That's always what would happen. I'd go into fight or flight or freeze. Now, when we're talking about this idea of us, whether you're watching from work or whether you're watching on your way to a practice or on the way to really doing some of your passion projects, what is this relationship that a lot of us have with fear? And why do we have such kind of a touchy, not too much fear in my life, Like, why do we try to eliminate all of the fear whatsoever, and we have very little training programs around it?
Yeah. So in my first graduate program, I focused on fear. In this last graduate program that I just finished up, I focused on stress.
How
And
many
with
graduate programs have you been in, Simpson?
two.
Amazing.
So, and it's interesting because for both of them, I went in being like, oh, how do we get rid of fear? How do we get rid of stress? And as I finished the research, we're finished with research, but as I was finishing,
Spoken like someone who's going to get her third graduate
oh,
degree soon.
oh yes, um, you never like finish that, but you don't actually want to get rid of fear and stress. They actually are huge teachers, and it's a way. It's about redefining how you look at them. And using them as a way to facilitate what you're doing. So, this actually segues really well into the whole stress thing, because actually fear can bring up become stressful for people, right? And a lot of times we say we're so stressed out when really we're worried or we're anxious or we're fearful. And stress is like a completely different thing.
So let's talk about the dichotomy between fear and stress, because I feel like they're coupled so much with each other.
They are. So like fear, so we have to have fear in our life for the three things you just said: fight, flight, and freeze, right? Like we are animals. Like there is a fear thing that is very necessary in order to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah.
However, fear can also be that sort of like, oh my God, I really want this thing, but I'm afraid it's not going to go well. And so then I'm afraid that I'm going to fail.
Yep.
So then that big word failure comes in, and we've always been taught that failure is something bad. Now here's where like being an artist has really helped me deal with failure. I cannot even tell you how many times when I'm choreographing a dance that a dancer will make a mistake, which is a failure, and I go, oh wait, that was awesome, let's do that instead. Or I mess up on a line, or somebody trips somewhere, something like that, which is like, oh my gosh, that's like such a failure. I'm like, everyone's going to make fun of me, they're going to laugh at me, and it's like, actually that's what that character should probably do there. And so this idea of like failure not being a shameful thing, but a thing that could actually help you to become successful is a different mind shift. So when I was working with those dancers and most performers since then, there's this fear of not being good enough, this fear of being rejected, and this fear of failure. And so those three things, and then there's the fear of getting hurt, like the actual like injury aspect of it, which is a completely different thing that has similar connections. But if we take like the fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, and the fear of being rejected, and not good enough and rejected are somewhat similar. All of those things, like if you get rejected, you get rejected from parts all the time. I was actually just having this conversation with somebody because they're like, oh, if I go into the performing arts world, I'm just going to be rejected all the time. And I was like, I'd really like to change that stigma. Every field gets rejected all the time.
Absolutely.
As a teacher, I am rejected on a daily basis by my students.
Yep.
I'm rejected by them when they decide to talk over me. I'm rejected by them when they go, oh, we have to do this again. Like that is rejection. But as a teacher, I would either just continue to cry every day, or I'd have to step back and say, okay, it's not about me, it's about them. How can I engage them in a different way? Like this.
I love that standpoint, Simpson. And what I also love about it is whether or not you're coming from the creative, whether you're in the creative space or whether you feel like you're not in the creative space. Let's go, for example, to the scientific space, because you've also been in multiple master's programs, right? So, if you start any science project off, you start with the null hypothesis. Then you go and test it. And technically, if you fail the null hypothesis, that means that growth has happened. There's been a change, a breakthrough.
Yes.
If the null hypothesis is proved, the status quo stays the same. So in many ways, I never thought of it until you said it that way, that the actual failure of the null hypothesis means progress is happening.
Right.
And so I'm
Yeah.
thinking about evolution. I'm thinking about whether it be the evolution of a character, the evolution of a qu- of a routine, the evolution of your own self. It all comes from the actual intake of the failure and integration.
Right. Well, and I think what's so great about like coaching and what a coach can help you do a lot of times is ask a question, like ask a good question after that,
Mm.
right? So like in taking like a research thing, so you have that, hypothesis, it doesn't you don't prove it, and it's like you have to ask another question afterwards. It makes you stop and like think and reflect and go, okay, so what question am I going to ask now? So say you don't get, the job that you were hoping to get, whether, or the promotion that you were hoping to get in your marketing agency or something like that. And it's like, okay, I didn't get that. Sure, you feel rejected, you feel not good enough, you feel like you failed. What if you could stop in that moment, like feel those feelings, because you want to feel those feelings, you can't just hide them. But then you stop and you say, okay, what can I learn from this? Like, maybe this company isn't the right fit for me. Maybe they're not seeing who I really am.
Yep.
Or maybe there's something that I'm missing that I need to go back and like, and get more knowledge about, or maybe I need to share more ideas in meetings so that they see me in a new way, right? But it's about asking the questions of what am I learning from this.
I love that. That's like, you're in education as well. Like, so if you've come across the work of Carol Dweck and the growth
Mm.
mindset, that's
Yep.
like so growth mindset stuff. I
Oh,
absolutely love it. I want to bite into it right now. But I also want to ask you this. Like, you talked about a societal thing, right? We're conditioned to fear failure. Why do you think we're conditioned for that? Because like when you're saying the opposite, it makes so much sense. It seems so much more graceful and easy to integrate failure into your life. Yet even when
yeah.
I say the word, it's loaded with judgment in internally.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'll probably have to ponder it for a little bit. But I would say that one of the reasons is this idea of who has the power, right? And so um, people at the top, and we can decide who those people are. Fear is the way that they have continued to have their power, right? And so this idea of not of telling people like, well, you can't fail because then you're not going to do this or you're not going to do that, and what they decided was failure and not failure, right? So like, I mean, if we can even get personal right here, like I'm 34, I'm a female, and I'm not married, right? Like for a lot of people, depending on how they were raised, that could look like I could look like I have failed at what it means to be a female
Mm,
in society,
mm,
right? And because I'm not married, I haven't had a child yet, and that's what we were supposed to do,
yep.
right? And so there can be a lot of judgment on that. I mean, I've been through it myself of like,
Yep.
well, and then it becomes, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? Like relationships that have ended, why was I rejected? Those
Yeah.
same sorts of things, right? But then it's like, okay, but who is that? Whose story is that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that my story? Is that the story I want to have? And where's that story coming from? And why do I want that person to have power, or those people to have power over who I am? So instead, being like, well, what have I have learned so much from the relationships that I've been in. I have learned so much being a female who's 34 and not married and having to like figure stuff out on my own, like I've learned so much about that like I don't like, not to say that if I got married 10 years, I mean, I would have been a completely different person if I got married 10 years ago, like it just would have been. So, again, being like, well, what am I learning from this? How is this making me better? And that I'm not a failure because of all of those things.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
I love that you're accessing your org behavior part there to address that question, because in so many ways it's counterintuitive to the individual in the organization, but it's intuitive to the organization to put in a certain amount of fear. Um, it's Friday, so I don't really have that great a vocabulary today. But as a control mechanism, right? So hey, this is our policy within the organization. You're not following policy, so let's threaten you to get back on board. and be prototypical, the prototypical output person that we need
Hmm.
you to be. We don't need you coming up with all these other ideas. Just do what's on the
Right.
paper. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know is that you've completely lost sight of whose voice was speaking to you. Is it the
Right.
voice inside, or is it the conditioned voice of the organization?
Exactly. I
And
mean,
we
this kind of
belong to
actually,
multiple organizations.
oh yeah, and
Yeah,
groups and things like that. And
yeah.
this actually goes back to my Speakers Who Dare speech, in the sense that, so you look at organizations. Well, yes, they are controlled by money, right? So it's like, how much money are we making? And performance there is judged by how much money you're bringing in, no matter what like company you're in. That's what's happening. So organizations are going to like put these mandates, or whatever they're going to call them, and be like, well, we can't do that because if that fails, we lose a lot of money.
Yep.
But when you put this like culture of fear going on, then people are afraid, because that's what you're
Yeah.
doing, to try new things and to be creative and all of that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Fear at some levels, like we need to have a certain level of like what we call in like science of arousal, right? Intensity level, in order to perform optimally. And that's the same with stress and all of that. Is you need to find where your threshold is. If it's too low, you're going to underperform. And if it's too high, you're going to just get overwhelmed.
Look
So
at you talking
finding,
about Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory.
yeah, oh my God, love him. I think everyone should have to read that book,
Have you
actually.
ever met him in person?
No,
He's
but
even more chill than you, Simpson.
there was a year I was reading that in Thanksgiving, instead of like doing great, I read a passage
You're such a
from
dork.
Flow, and everyone was like, and I was like, no, this will really help you.
Oh my
Um,
god, you're a dork. I love it.
I'm actually looking at it right now in my bookcase. It's so great. So anyway, so we have to have, to have the optimal experience,
Yeah.
we have to have that certain level, right? So what happens though in a lot of organizations is that we don't allow people to get to that level so they can be creative, and we don't allow them to fail and be like, okay, that didn't work, let's try something else, because there's this pressure of like, well, then we'll lose money, we'll do this, we'll do that. However, research is now showing, which makes complete sense, that when you're not being creative, you have less engagement in your
Yes.
job. And when
Yes.
you're less engaged in your job, you have more stress, which leads
Yes.
to burnout. And then your productivity and your performance just goes down.
Yep.
So, organizations need to start figuring out, how can we allow for creativity, to allow for our employees to feel engaged, to feel bought in and empowered and respected and part of the system, and not fear that if they make a mistake or something, their idea doesn't work out the way that they thought, that there's going to be repercussions to some extent of that, because that actually will allow them to grow in a way that they probably never thought they could. Because at some point, there's going to be a new idea that actually goes way better than anybody thought.
Okay, Stephanie Simpson. So you're talking about certain things that have gone back all the way back to um, like past the 1970s, ancient times, right? So like people who used to talk about life as being treated like a laboratory, right? Where we're experimenting with things, and sometimes it'll blow up in our face, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. And I'm beginning to see the difference, and I think I am. Between the fear and the stress. Fear is something that can be like this sort of emotional tool, manipulation tool, but really stress is kind of the press that you feel from the organization, or and that could be a positive or negative press. But like when the press becomes so much that you can't perform anymore,
Yes.
you've gone on one end. When the
Yes.
press is too light on you, you're just like, hey man, no accountability. I don't have
Right.
to show up for work today.
Right.
And so I think I'm hearing you say that press is something, stress is like the organizational press, but also at the same time, if we're devoid of stress completely, if we're devoid of fear completely, we're missing out on a very human, a very a very primal feeling that we've always felt since
Right.
we
Yeah.
evolved.
Yes, and stress is exactly what you were saying, is that like when the stress becomes so overwhelming, like so much so, then it becomes debilitating, right? And so that's I'm not going to say this correctly, but right now, but it's that finding that like sweet spot of, okay, I know that I can handle all these things that are happening. And that's when you then start getting like, okay, how am I going to plan things? What are my goals? How can I like set up systems for that? That we can really perform really well, right? So I started, when I started like thinking about this idea of stress, I started thinking also, how often do I say that I'm stressed? And to, when I want to say the word, to really step back and say, but am I? Or am I just saying this word because that's what I'm used to saying, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, this last grad program, right, it's the norm. And we also, for some reason, it's like a badge of honor. Like, it's like, oh, I'm so stressed out right now. I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, why in our society is that looked at as like, oh, yeah, well, guess what? Look what I'm doing, you know?
It turns into
like,
the stress Olympics, right?
Right. And
I
like,
pulled 4 all-nighters and took 9 people's ADHD medications, right? Like, and I didn't eat once the whole time.
Exactly. And like, that's not like, and then no one, going back to happy, that doesn't seem joyful or happy.
No, it's such an effed up form of humble bragging.
Right. So instead, it's like, well, let's like reframe this. And so that I really started realizing in this last grad program, I was doing it while I was working full time. And it was like a different thing of like, okay, I'm going to this program, I'm paying a lot of money for it. I really want to be able to read everything that they're giving me, but holy crap, they're giving me so much to read. And I found myself being like, oh my God, I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And I stopped and I was like, what if I change and I say, I get to do this? And that, I kid you not, that one little word changed everything. When I would sit down to read, like get up really early to read before I went to work, and then during free periods and all that, I would be like, I get to read this thing about, leadership and group development. I get to read this article about how somatic practices are being brought into executive coaching. Like, I get to read, stuff about transformative learning and how amazing that theory is. And that would just change the way, like, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm excited to see this. Like my like energy went this way, and I felt freer in my body than being like, oh my God, I have to do this. And you could just feel that your muscles start going like this, and you're like, right?
Absolutely. And what I love about that is you did say that was a small shift, but there's multiple studies, especially from the California and the Pennsylvania area, on the idea of looking at life from the privilege that you have and really taking it in with a sense of gratitude. And the idea of gratitude, I mean, we don't have, that's another episode, but you're talking about like the same kind of effects as antidepressants at this point. Gratitude and antidepressants, so we could shut down a whole industry if a lot of people made that tiny little switch, Mm-hmm. So I think that it's really, really, really interesting in the way that you pull that all together, Simpson. So this is what we just did. We just got into flow for all. It's 53 after the hour. Can you believe this, homie?
We had there's 8 elements. There's like the time. There's I
know. Like, I've got all your points in front of me. And so like, if we can begin to like, this is who I want to talk to right now, is the person that feels on the side of overwhelm right now. Mm-hmm. And like, what are some quick, I don't like using the word hacks all the time, but what are some quick things that we can do to get back on track with pulling it back to a sweet spot?
Great. So actually, this is why I created the stress management program I did. Yeah. So I created a workbook called 21-Day Stress Management Workbook, a holistic interactive guide to redefining your relationship with stress. So for me, I come from the perspective that we are multidimensional humans. We are holistic mind, body, spirit. And so if we're only trying to shift some things in our life from one viewpoint, it's most likely not going to happen. So how can we have multiple different tools, multiple different practices? The other thing I started realizing was one thing is not going to work for every single person, and one tool isn't going to work for you every single day. So going back to the idea of me, I did my yoga training. After yoga training, they have you do this thing where you're supposed to do yoga every day and blah, 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 and all this sort of stuff. And that started stressing me out because I was like, I don't have time to do this. I don't have, and all of that. Then I went through a meditation, facilitation thing. And I was like, oh, I need to meditate every day. And then if I didn't meditate every day, I started stressing myself out. And I started realizing, and it was actually through working with a coach that I used to work with, that I was like, this, like, meditating doesn't help me every day. Doing yoga doesn't help me every day. Sometimes watching a 20-minute like sitcom and laughing for 20 minutes is what I need to do. Sometimes I need to color. Sometimes I need to write. Sometimes I need to have a solo dance party. And like, that's a lot of what I do, Sometimes I just need to nap. And so I started realizing, like, well, what if a practice isn't about practicing the same thing every day? What if a practice is about practicing different things every day with the same intention? And the intention is to have a better relationship with stress. So, there's a lot of research around the 21-day thing. I will tell everybody this, all these 21-day things is not that you will be fully changed in 21 days. It's that there is research that this plastic surgeon realized that after 21 days, a lot of his patients were starting to like feel better. And so that was like the sweet spot. But that really, for some people, it could be 100 days until you've integrated a new habit. So,
and depending on where your mindset is, for some people, it takes over a year to change that.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So the intention.
You're an absolute nerd. You're talking about behavior change models now.
Yeah. So the idea about the workbook is that there are 21 different practices. There are 7 different categories, and 3 practices within each category. So every day you get a new one. All of them are anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes long. They can be done in and out of the workplace. And the whole idea is that you have these different practices. You can rate your stress level before and after. There's motivational quotes at the bottom of them because I love my quotes. And then there's a place to reflect on it. Like, how did I feel during this? Did this work? And then there's a little like rating system that be like, you know what? I give this one a 5. I give this one a 1. So at the end of the 21 days, you have 21 different practices in your basket. You get to choose which ones you want to use. You can look back and see which ones you rated a 5 versus a 1. And then it's about taking any of those practices and just being intentional about them throughout all the days afterwards. And so some of them, like, breath is one of the categories. So if, I was going to leave people with, just a basic thing to do right now, one of them is 4-count breathing. And so it's just inhaling on a 4 count, pausing on a 4 count, exhaling on a 4 count, and then pausing again on a 4 count. And people call that square breathing. They call it 4-count breath, all that sort of stuff. But even just doing that will shift a lot of things. But in the workbook, there's a ton of other stuff. In the program that I actually created, the workbook comes with the program for free. So it's actually a one-to-one coaching program with me that you then get the workbook. And for you to go through. I then also become your accountability partner, but we also go through a lot of other things because it's a one-to-one coaching program. And for listeners, you can go to my website, which is stephanie-simpson.com. They're under work with me. It's listed there. You can send me an email. And if you mention that you heard it through the Golden Mike Live, then you get $50 off that program.
I absolutely love what you're throwing down. I'm picking up what you're throwing down. And I also love the fact that you're taking a holistic approach to it, right? The first thing that one of the first things I was taught in positive psychology was this model called SPIRE, S-P-I-R-E. S stands for spiritual, P for physical, I for intellectual, R for the relationships that we have with people, and E for emotional. And so in many ways, I saw that as the first integrative model. And now that I'm seeing folks like you, Stephanie, taking it and putting it into action, not only is it cool model work, but like you're gamifying it. You've turned it into bite-sized pieces so that people don't get overwhelmed with it. Mm-hmm. You've built in a feedback loop, go 1 to 5 on things. So you have a scale to, at the end of it, to be like, okay, I've got a new toolkit. I can use this, kind of like I use my 5-iron, never. But I know it's there if I ever need to use it for some reason. I'll always use my 9-iron and my whatchamacallit, my driver. That's all I need, baby. And so like, it's just more tools for your toolkit. When I became a roller derby player, Yes, I was a roller derby player,
That's
Simpson.
awesome.
Um,
That's awesome.
the level of stress was unlike anything else because not only were you trying to perform at your best, you weren't trying to re-break your arm or break someone else's arm. And like
Hmm.
the level of stress there, but then also at the same time, like to go to New York City and meet people for the first time and be in a stage that I've never been to and work with a new director, very stressful. To be in grad school, it's stressful. To be a parent is stressful. And we're
Hmm.
always going through transitions. And so I love the fact that you have your stress management program. Stephanie-Simpson.com. It's in the show notes. $50 off the stress management program. There's also a workbook included. What more do you want? Stephanie, her cat will show up probably if she coaches you long enough.
That's
Uh,
true.
Bailey will show up, and also, and also you get all this like these years of knowledge and experience. That's one of the greatest things about coaching. Coaches get to accelerate that stress, and you don't have to be in that, that zone of overwhelm for longer than you need to be. If,
Yeah.
if you feel like you're in that zone of overwhelm or underwhelm, find that sweet spot with Stephanie. Stephanie-Simpson.com. Simpson, you're my buddy, homie. Like,
I
I love
know.
that we just went into like a 1 hour like flow
I
session that
know.
was over like this.
I know. It's crazy.
It's
On a
wild.
Friday too.
On a Friday, exactly. Simpson, this is the reason that the show is called the Golden Mike. I want you to come back anytime you want to, and we need to have like a reunion of that cohort because the way
Oh
that we
yeah.
were brought together, like I felt like we were family, and I don't disconnect as well as you do. I don't move on as well as you do, Simpson. So I hope we get to have hope we get to have that reunion soon. But this is what's going on. We're gonna do a visioning activity. It's over
Okay.
there in New York. A golden mic is now coming down from your ceiling and coming to rest in front of you, Simpson.
Hmm.
Now the power of this golden mic is that it translates into every language, all across the world, and I've got the switch to amplify it. Stephanie Simpson, the world is now gathering around to listen to the message that you've been called to tell us right now. So Stephanie, your golden mic is on now.
Well, I'm just really thankful to be here. And you asked about my purpose earlier, and I've done a lot of reflection on what my purpose is. And I love working with people of all ages and empowering them to dig deep and align themselves and find balance in their life so that they can live unapologetically and authentically and just kick ass in both their personal and professional lives, whatever that may be. And just bring my creativity, my nerdiness, all of that to it, and do it in any way I possibly can.
Love it. Love it. I want you to take that golden mic because you're the last person to hold the golden mic this week. I want you to feel the weight. Do you feel the weight of that
I
golden mic?
do.
Now I want you to smash that golden mic, Simpson.
Just
Smash, step on the golden
big,
mic. Bailey,
big mind
step.
check. Bailey, oh, he got
Bailey,
up.
step
He
on
got
that
up.
golden
He
mic.
did it. He sees it. He's doing
Stomp it,
it.
Bailey. Stomp that golden mic. We've got a big budget on this show. We'll have more golden mics on Monday. Now, this is what Simpson and I are going to do. We're going to shut off. The show. It's Friday, and hopefully, if you're like us, we're gonna spend our time not on social media. We're gonna go and connect with real people, like real things, and we advise you to do the same thing. That's what life is all about. We're using social media for social good, but also go out there and connect with people. There's nothing that can replace it. So the final question that Stephanie and I have for you, and Stephanie, I want you back on the show. Come back anytime you want,
I
please.
will. I will.
Maybe we'll have a Speakers Who Dare forum at one point.
Ooh.
A debate, if you will. The final question that Stephanie and I have for you is this. If you're feeling good and you're living life to its fullest purpose, what is your responsibility to change history for the better? I'm Mark Cordone. This is Stephanie Simpson. It's been Golden Mike 148. If it's resonated with you, thank you for sharing this out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will see you soon. Take care. Bye. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Home slide.